Welcome to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, an executive leadership coach and seasoned people leader. This podcast is all about helping leaders grow, navigate challenges, and build high-performing teams with real stories, insights, and strategies you can apply today. Let's dive in.
I want to have listening education in elementary schools worldwide. That's my goal, is to make, so I always say, do you want to ski at 5 or learn to ski at 5 or 35? It's just easier to get on the mountain at 5. So adults can learn how to listen differently, even after years and years of not being taught how and developing bad habits. But this is a life-changing skill that builds your learning abilities.
Okay, Christine. And we're live right now. Well, we're not live. We're recording right now. So, hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. This is David, and I got Christine Miles here, who is an expert in the listening path. And we were just talking about what drives Christine to do what she does. So, Christine, maybe a few words about what you do, and more importantly, why are you doing it?
Yeah, what we do is we teach children and adults how to listen, to understand. Why I do it is because I think listening is the most powerful form of communication that is rarely taught. Only 2% of people worldwide have any form of listening training. And I learned very young how to listen differently. And I also saw early the consequences of not listening. And most of the time, poor listening and the consequences seem invisible, but the costs are absolutely staggering. So my mission is to change the paradigm of how we treat listening and to create a movement where listening is actually something that we teach and learn both in organizations and in schools.
Yeah, we're taught a lot in organizations, in school, how to do presentations, how to stand in front of the class and confidently give a speech. I remember one of my early ones in grade 4 or something was, first of all, I didn't even know what to talk about. So I talked about the Swiss Alps.
Wow.
Well, it was the most boring. Back then you had Encyclopedia Britannica, you open it up and, letter A, I was lazy. So letter A was from Aardvark was Alps. Alps look kind of cool. I'm like, wow, the Alps are really, really high. Thank you. That encapsulated my speech there, by the way.
Yeah.
But and by the way, and at work they teach you how to present and have the executive presence and such. But I haven't encountered too many courses or ways of how do you actively listen to people and actually utilize what you hear as a springboard and the curiosity in you as a springboard to understanding more deeply what someone wants to understand.
Yeah.
And even more importantly, developing the patience to want to understand the other person's point of view. And I see you got some books in the back. So for those listeners, it looks like you have some. Are those children's books or?
They're actually there's a book and 2 games that I've created. The books, the games are not on the market yet. We use the one game called Mastering the Listening Path for organizations. The other game is the base game, the Listening Path, which will ultimately sell to schools. So yeah, I'm waiting for the patent to clear before we release those games. So
okay,
yeah,
all right,
yeah,
it's patent pending right now, right?
Yes, patent pending.
Okay.
Yep.
So none of you trolls out there better steal this from Christine. I'm telling you. Okay.
Good luck if you try.
Yeah, good luck.
It was quite a feat to try to figure that one out, creating a game to teach the skill of listening, but it works. It's really fun too.
So I guess that is an interesting question. So you say you teach listening in schools as well as in organizations. Yeah. How do you teach listening?
So let me just, first of all, I want to say I appreciate what you said about speech and what they do in organizations. And it's important that we learn how to speak and talk in a meaningful way. However, it's like only half of your leg. And in order for it to have a functional leg, you need a hamstring and a quad. So let's just develop both muscles. And the skills are actually very related, which is part of what is the how. So how do we teach it? We teach it in a simple way. So there's active listening, and that came in 1957, believe it or not, by an American psychologist.
Really?
1957. And it was the intention behind it is the same intention that we have, which is make sure you understand more than what is said and that you get inside the speaker and understand beyond what they communicate. How do you do that? Well, it was a psychologist that introduced it, and it really was around teaching psychologists how to actively listen, not the general population. But the intention is so powerful that I think it's stuck. I call it the Kleenex. It's like the brand recognition of listening. But there's 11 to 12 behaviors that you have to act and institute in order to actively listen. Don't hold judgment, be empathetic, make eye contact, give thoughtful attention, repeat what you hear, ask good questions, on and on. And it's just highly complicated for the average person to do. So how did we simplify it? Well, I'm dyslexic. I learned later in life. And so I kind of paint pictures in my mind and in stories. And you can also see there's a picture behind you. So the story of the path is you wouldn't go hiking in the woods unprepared. You wouldn't go in with your good intentions. And that's basically what we're doing with listening. We're going in with our good intentions. So we give you the tools to be prepared so that you can understand the story. And there's 12 tools total on the path. I wrote about 6 in the book. And that's primarily what we teach. And it's a system, but the tools are based on the hiking metaphor and how you navigate the path to understanding in a clear and simple way by using these tools. And then it calms all the other stuff down because our brains, you said about patience, our brains are the greatest enemy of listening. Mm-hmm. Our conscious brain is logical and says, listen. And our subconscious brain is completely illogical and it's in charge telling you not to listen. And so the subconscious is most of the time winning.
So I'm not going to talk about adults. I'm going to talk about kids because I'm always interested in abilities that are learned, like skills that are learned versus some people have something more innate. Mm-hmm. When you look at the population of kids you work with or younger folks, who are better listeners? What's their sort of behaviors and personalities?
Yeah. So generally the personalities are when a parent says to or a teacher says to me, this child's incredibly empathetic. That means they're tuning into the feelings of the person in the story, not just the facts. And so they're likely to get a lot more. Those children, but that is more innate for some children. Some children are born more empathetic. Some have experiences that make them more empathetic. So empathy, though, is not the precursor to being a good listener. I believe when you learn to listen, you become empathetic, not the other way around. So more the reason why we need to teach it young, because if you're not naturally as wired to be empathetic, this is why it's important to build that muscle so that it's not just innate and that it's something we're developing.
So you're saying you find folks like kids who are just have this empathy built into them.
Yeah.
They tend to be better listeners. And I guess that would correspond to adults too.
Sure.
I can see that. Yeah.
I think some of it gets socialized out of us though. That because let me back up for a second. When you're listening, most people think they're just listening to words, what the speaker says, and that there's no order or rhyme or reason. When in reality, when you're listening, you're always listening to a story. So if your kid says, you say to them, how was school today? And they say good. I always say that's a story. Like you just got to find it. So now stories have 2 parts of a narrative to be cohesive. If you think about a movie, they need both facts and feelings that are conveyed, or you're not interested. It's not compelling. We chase facts when we listen to stories, but we're not used to asking about feelings. And those who are more empathetic tend to go for the feelings more, but socialization tells us don't do that. We're not socialized to explore feelings, which is why we miss so much as listeners. Yeah.
Yeah. That's one thing I learned through the process of getting like my certification in coaching, right?
Yep.
And one of the things they teach you to explore more is, first of all, like, don't get wrapped up in the story itself. It's what's the story behind the story. What are they trying to say when they say it's good?
Yeah.
Right? And a natural next question to my kid, if they say, "Oh, it's good," is it could be describe how it was good, or how does this good feel to you? It's using their words, reflecting it back to them, but also understanding the next layer down. How's it feel? Or a description of it, something like that. So you get deeper into how they actually feel.
Yeah.
My son typically says, "Oh, it was good."
Yeah.
So I challenge him sometimes. So how's school today? And don't say good.
Yeah. Does he
And then
respond to that?
He'll actually go into more stories about, well, I did this with this person, and then he'll go into more details, and there's something to anchor a conversation off of in that way.
Usually, and so the fact that you're just even going for more is so important because a lot of people feel stuck when they get that kind of an answer, whether they're in a sales conversation or in a conversation with their child. they think it's the speaker's fault. And I always say your job as the listener is to guide the speaker to tell the story. You're in charge, not them. So we actually, part of my belief is that questions are a really important part of listening, but they also interfere with listening. So the kinds of questions we ask can shape the story. And that's part of where, how do you get the story behind the story? It can get very complicated. So we have a tool that's called the compass, where that simplifies the questions you ask to get all the things you need to get without having to think about the questions.
What can you describe this compass?
Sure. So, like I said, when you're listening, you're always listening to a story. We tend to go forward in stories. Like, so for example, I was in an auto accident when I was 28, and then at 31, I had chronic pain that went acute. It was a long time. People say to me, well, you're okay now, right? Things are good now, though, right? They go
You're like,
right from that to forward.
yes,
So, but
yes.
see, part of that is they want me to be okay. That's not all
Yeah.
ill-willed, because
Yeah.
pain is uncomfortable. So the compass actually makes sure you go back as well as you go forward. So there's 6 questions the professional listeners use. They're journalists and therapists. I happen to be a recovering therapist. That's how I started my career. So the first question on the compass is, take me back to the beginning.
Mm.
So if your child says, how's school today? Was good. Well, take me back. Where did it start? So that's one question. Tell me more. Very powerful question. How'd that make you feel? Okay. What happened next? Or then what happened? Adults can use because good listeners kind of imperceptibly ask the tell me more question. And then there's, it sounds like you felt. So there's 4 fact, 2 feeling questions. You're guaranteed to get both. And you can use those questions as often as you like and in any order you like. And those are pretty much the only questions you need to get a story from somebody, to get to the root cause and the story behind the story.
You mentioned at the beginning that you found out earlier in life the consequences of not learning to listen or listening well. What did you mean by that?
Well, good question.
I see. I'm learning. I'm learning.
Well, so this is a version of take me back to the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So take me back. Where did that start for you? So I always say I learned to listen starting at the age of 5, because that's my earliest memory of having a listen differently moment. So I had a really great childhood in many, many ways, but my mother also suffered from mental illness, depression, and anxiety. She lost her mother from childbirth. So she lost her mother, didn't have a mother her whole life, and knew she was the reason for her mother's death. As you can imagine, not easy. So people struggled to understand my mother's pain because it was always below the surface. She was warm and charismatic and funny and all the wonderful things, but she was in a lot of pain below. And people would rush to remind her, like, hey, your life's really great. Look at all these wonderful things. What I saw is people weren't really seeing or listening to her. And I call it death by 1,000 cuts. Every time she tried to express, they try to talk her out of that, and her pain got worse. So I saw how when people didn't listen, that emotional denial with well-intended responses were causing more pain. And once you start to notice that, you start to see it everywhere. So if you talk about leadership, if a leader doesn't listen to their employees, doesn't mean they have to do everything that the employee says, but if they don't hear it, listen to it, it causes a wound. Meetings, people aren't listening to each other. All the ways, relationships, divorces, all the things that happen, these are small wounds that have added up over time until things are kind of bleeding out.
Yeah. I guess like I'm bordering on like therapy here, right? But
Are we
I'm
all?
trying. Yeah. Well, no, I'm trying to be very, very, very sympathetic, empathetic here, because I have met folks in my life who are not great at sharing their true feelings,
Mm,
and instead what they say or what they do is symptom,
yeah.
and sometimes very far symptom of what they're
Yeah.
truly feeling or saying or what they really need. And it might be that, like the pain that you're talking about, that you saw in your mom earlier in life, and I relate to something like that.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until, like, maybe recently I finally put 2 and 2 together,
Yeah.
what this person was trying to say to me all these years
Mm,
without saying it.
mm,
And part of it is, I'm bringing it up because part of it is, man, I have a rock for a head, but also, like, okay, could this person have helped the listener better
mm.
and I'm being very careful here because it sounds like I'm blaming, and I'm very careful. I'm trying to not,
I
right?
appreciate that. It's hard
Yeah,
not to. Yeah.
I'm very conscious of the how controversial this question might be,
Yeah.
right? So because that's gone through, like, very honestly has gone through my head. It's like, first of all, you have a rock for a head. How
Yeah.
can you not hear that? And second of all, I was like, well, I wish the person was more clear to me all these
Yeah.
years. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess what are your thoughts on that? And
Well, I think so. Let me neutralize that a little bit,
yeah,
because the same thing has happened when I've talked to salespeople and their customers. Why didn't the customer just tell me what their problem was? Right?
hmm
Like, so the problem is the person doesn't always know.
hmm,
And being vulnerable is really hard, first of all. Sometimes the person doesn't know. And our job as the listeners to help both create that safety as well as the expression of it. So this is a hard thing though, because we're not, in some cultures, this is even more so. We're families. You can even take it to that. If we're not allowed to express those feelings, it takes longer to get them out and to figure them out, which is why I believe as a listener, we need to encourage that, whether we're talking to a customer in a sales call or to our best friend, asking about their feelings and trying to name those feelings and create that language is an important part of listening, as so that we can solve some of these kind of problems and create greater connection. We're just not used to doing that. I mean, most people have three emotions they can name. Three,
yeah. What is
you
it?
know, happy, glad, sad, or angry.
Angry.
Right. Yeah. Frustrated. So there's all kinds of emotions. And so when we increase the emotional language, this is why it's important to say, not only have that make you feel, but it sounds like you felt, because I can name an emotion that may not have occurred to you. That doesn't mean I'm going to get it right, but you might go, no, I'm not disheartened. And you say whatever that emotion is, but it's easy to feel like, why didn't the person tell me? But often they don't know, or they don't know how to put language around it because
Yeah, how
they
to
haven't been
express
taught
it.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that clarifies things a lot too. And I guess, like, for those who, like, I work with a lot of people in sales,
Hmm.
in my job, and that is probably one of the biggest struggles they have with, it's hard enough with a family member or a good friend to
Yeah.
get this out. And that was, what I was describing. It was like, a good friend. Mm, But, imagine meeting a customer. I don't know about you. I wouldn't disclose too much to a vendor because it would, my negotiation position, et cetera, et cetera. But I
Yeah.
also know if I don't disclose enough, they can't help me.
Yeah.
And so, how do you, for the sales professionals out there, as well as the people who are trying to buy from a vendor,
Hmm.
what's that balance you need to strike at, maintain your negotiation posture, like, I want to get the best deal eventually,
Hmm.
but at the same time, helping the other person enough, like giving enough so that they can actually help you with the right
Yeah.
solution.
Yeah. I think that 100% that's always on the salesperson. I do. So I have to engender enough trust that you want to tell me those things. And if I'm going to feel sold to, I'm less likely to do that. So I always say listening first to understand earns you the right to negotiate harder, to ask for more. But so you can't solve the problem unless you know the real problem. And so we throw a lot of solutions out quickly without truly understanding the customer, and then that creates that angst. So listening is the best negotiation tool. If you want to hold on price, on value, on those things, then you're going to be in a much stronger position if you actually understand the customer, which I know you know. But the way to get that is to make sure you're not selling too soon and that you're not daring to sell until you understand.
Yeah. That's a common problem, especially when you see when there's the pressure of hitting quota,
Yeah.
and at the same time, there's that desperation that comes out. And hey, over the years, like, customers have said to me, and people around me is, man, I'm afraid of you guys when you walk in.
Mhm.
Why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I feel like you're always just going to pitch me something and make me sign
Yeah.
order form for something else. And I can't blame them. I've been on the other side. I've
Yeah.
talked to salespeople when I was buying software. It's a terrible experience.
Yeah.
And then they call you and they keep harassing you. And
Yeah.
that was the last straw for me. Like,
Yeah.
I go, there's one terrible story. This is 15 years ago at least. This guy kept on calling me, I'm like, dude, no. He kept on calling me. He called from Skype. He called from different numbers. Eventually, that was like already, hey, dude, like,
Enough.
you first of all, like I'm not going to answer, and I'm going to let you f up your quarter, and you'll probably get
Yeah.
fired
Yeah.
because you know what, you've pissed me off already. I said no, and you're just pushing, and
Yeah.
you probably overcommitted this number for the quarter without getting, you know, a true buying process and blah blah
Mm-hmm.
blah, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he got fired after that. But it was just such a turn off.
It's a turn on. I don't even like walking in a clothing store and having someone say, "Can I help you?" or a Best Buy. So why would I want to have to endure that? So,
Yeah.
I talk about this in my book. I was a reluctant salesperson all my life. As I said, I started as a therapist. I've always done some form of selling,
Yeah.
always. But
Are you
I was,
are you better? Are you okay? Is everything okay
yeah,
now?
well, I like selling now, but it took me starting my own business to realize, hey, to get my arms around it. And the first sales call I had a CEO that was, I mean, my literal first sales call. He wanted training for his senior leaders. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. That's what my head said at first. But I went, no idea why this guy's asking for training. None whatsoever. And he goes, he didn't know either. He didn't know what he needed. And
Mm,
so he's like, can you put a proposal together for me? I go, I could, but what am I going to propose? I don't know what the problem is. And I just
yeah.
kept saying, no, 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 because I didn't have it and I didn't know it. And eventually, through my unwillingness to just sell to him something that I didn't think, because I didn't know how to solve it, I made a pretty big deal that had, spin for years, basically. So, but when we have the solution, see, the more knowledge and experience you have, and the more you've seen the movie, the more you know how to solve the problem. And then we're more likely to sell. This was my first sales call. I didn't jump to, yeah, I got that solution because I wasn't, I was less sure of myself. But it was a real lesson in that even if the one that's telling you to solve the problem is giving you permission to solve it, don't fall into that sales trap. You need to, before you start pushing solutions or selling solutions, is to make sure you really are on the same page and understanding. Your chances for a win go way, way up if you do that first.
So if I can change the subject really quickly here, if let's say we fast forward 2 years from now,
Yeah.
what's the impact you want to have?
I want to have listening education in elementary schools worldwide. That's my goal, is to so I always say, do you want to ski at 5 or learn to ski at 5 or 35? It's just easier to get on the mountain at 5. So adults can learn how to listen differently, even after years and years of not being taught how and developing bad habits. But this is a life-changing skill that builds your learning abilities. 85% of what we learn is through listening. It builds your social emotional capabilities. It builds your ability to handle conflict, describe emotions. Like, it's such a huge life skill that we're doing such a disservice to the youth not to provide formal education on this.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess when you think about, you know, you work with a lot of leaders out there, CEOs and such. If you had to prioritize 3 skills and you wanted to give that advice to a leader, those 3 skills, what would they be that they should learn to be a great leader?
Well, certainly one is listening. Now, to me, these are foundational to some other skills, though. So, because I think listening earns you the right to do the other things I'm about to tell you what that needs to happen. You need to learn to have really difficult conversations that involve conflict, because when you're dealing with people, you're going to inevitably face conflict. So again, listening to understand helps you do that. And then you need to learn how to be a really good coach so
Okay.
that you can not only tell people what to do, but help them learn how to do it themselves.
Yeah. That's a lot of what we talk about here as well, is coaching, right?
Yeah.
Coaching versus mentoring.
Yeah.
I guess when you think about what you learned over the years, and if you had to go back to tell a younger version of Christine Miles and give her advice, what would that advice be?
Hmm. Good question. I left a lot on the table in my younger days because I didn't ask for as much as that I could leverage. I said I was a reluctant salesperson. I liked understanding people and hearing from people. I was more reluctant to sell, but I didn't realize how much that earned me the right to do it. So if you could, I left a lot on the table. I think when you really give that much and you give that understanding, you can really push the relationship in a positive way, in a very strong direction. Yeah. So that both parties win.
Could I ask you some rapid questions here?
Sure. Yeah.
Rapid answers. What's a book or movie you would recommend?
Wow. A book or movie I would recommend. There's a book, it's an older book. It's called The Gift of Fear by Gavin DeBecker. Have you heard of it? It's so he talks about listening to yourself in a very different way. So when you fear everything, you fear nothing, and how to tune into that. And I think there's so many lessons in that in terms of leadership and personal and what you could do with that. So that's a very powerful book. He grew up in a very abusive household. He was an FBI agent, but he talked about how to learn to listen to that inner voice. So that if you tune into that, it changes a lot of things. What was the second question you asked me? Book? Oh, movie. Oh, what movie? Well, Memento. Do you remember the movie Memento?
No, I don't.
I don't want to spoil alert this, but they tell the story in a very confusing way. And there's a metaphor to that, to listening. And I won't give the ending, but this is the moral of the story. Just the way that movie was told is the way we're having conversations all the time. The speaker confuses the listener from the start. And if you don't know where you are on the path, you're not gonna get to the understanding. And that movie is a great metaphor for that.
Metaphors. Excellent. We talk a lot about that too. Last question I ask every guest here, Christine. What's one question I haven't asked you, but I should have asked you?
What's one question? See, this is there's so many questions. How does that make you feel? That's probably the question you haven't asked me.
How's all this make you feel?
Well, I appreciate how it makes me feel great, because the fact that you're mission driven, before we started, and you said, I do this because I want to bring the voices together and, create them for nothing. Like this is an act of love for you, is what I heard. So, we're making money is a great thing, and I love the work we're doing, and obviously, but the fact that we can make a difference in the world, so that makes me feel very connected and appreciative.
Yeah. If I was to answer that question too, is just this past week, I had I usually try to find something to be grateful for. You know how the people say gratitude.
Yeah.
It does ground you. It reminds you,
Yeah.
like, actually, you're making some difference to someone. And last week, it was like a multitude of things that just happened all at once. Where, in a good way, where one person who came to me out of the blue at work, who just wanted to network, and I met them, and I was so amazed by this person. Hey, I knew they weren't ready for a role in my team, but I knew
Hmm.
someone who they should at least talk to. 24 hours later, they talked to this person. In less than 30 days, they got hired. There was an
Wow.
open role. I didn't know there was an open role there. And this person came back to me and said, David, thank you for what? Just by chance, you're
Yeah.
networking and you pushing me to someone else. I have my dream job now.
That's
And
amazing.
that was amazing. And then another individual who came back and said, hey, that job I was talking to you about and getting coaching from you, I got the job.
Hmm.
And it was a higher level. Now this person's a peer of mine in another department, but they came by and said thank you. And I know I wasn't the sole person, but I feel proud because I had a hand in helping that
Yeah.
person achieve
Yeah.
that role.
Pride that's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, and it reminds me, because this is so valuable to me, it reminds me that I am doing this for the right reason. I'm
Hmm.
always aware. And my wife warned me when I started this podcast. She goes, don't get that capitalistic mind of yours going and how to make this bigger and scaling and do this.
Yeah.
And she goes, once you go there, it becomes work for you.
Yeah. It
She knows me
changes
too
it.
well.
That's great.
And
Good, good wife.
I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for
Mm.
her. Like,
Yeah.
very seriously.
Mm.
That's why choosing a partner in your life that supports you,
It makes a difference, doesn't it? Yeah.
who sees more in
Or
you
who
than you
gets
see in
you and
yourself. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
right. And who gets you. And yeah, because it does change things. But, so I think that's what great coaches do, as well as as an athlete, I liked scoring, but I like the assist even more than the score. Like when you set someone up to put that ball in the cage, it's such an amazing feeling. And I think as leaders, that's what we have to get joy in, is not just our own personal shots, but helping others make their goals. I mean, it's really, kind of
Yeah.
cool to see that happen.
Yeah. It was such a good feeling. And, but yeah,
Good,
it
good for
reinforces
you.
that. Yeah. Yeah. So something I reflect on as well.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get along very well, Christine. I can
Yeah, I
see you.
appreciate knowing you.
I would love you back on this podcast. You have such an energy about you, and you're very clear what you're trying to do and what you're trying to focus on. I really appreciate, but I respect that a lot. And I got to tell you, like we've just known each other for what 30 minutes now.
Yeah.
Like, hey, everyone listening, by the way, this is the first time Christine and I met, and we're talking like two good friends in a coffee shop, right?
Yeah, I
So
appreciate that. Those are very kind words. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Christine, it's been 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And by the way, if people want the compass that I talked about, we have a whole the compass in detail for them if they want to learn more about that. They can download it from the website, thelisteningpath.com.
Okay.
That's
Well,
a good
when we
resource
post
for
this,
them. Yeah.
yeah, we'll post this on all our socials, Instagram, LinkedIn, and I try not to touch any of the other social media garbage out there.
You met. Yeah.
But we will put those links as part of the show notes as well as in our social media posts. So, well, Christine,
Thank you.
good chatting with you.
You as well. Thank you, David.
Yeah, have a good day.
You too.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, and my mission is to help leaders grow, lead with impact, and build thriving teams. If you found this valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow leader. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.